Hey guys, welcome back to Coreskills. I'm Spencer, and we're going to talk about kind of a somewhat controversial topic today, but something I'm really passionate about. I get a lot of questions from people. Hey, I'm getting into sketching. Should I get the iPad Pro? Should I get a Cintiq? Should I get a Microsoft Surface? But I don't get a lot of questions about, hey, what kind of paper should I use? What kind of pen should I use? And so, what we're going to talk about today is digital versus analog sketching. Big whammy of a topic. And digital sketching is cool. Like, there's a lot of pluses to it. Analog sketching is really cool too, and there's a lot of pluses. But I just kind of want to talk through some of the, I guess, pros and cons. So I have with me my trusty pad of paper here, and I also have my iPad Pro. Now, as far as digital sketching goes, I've kind of settled in with one product personally. I do have a couple biases. I'll say that I do have an iPhone, I have a MacBook Pro, I have a Mac Pro, so it made sense for me to get the iPad Pro. But even if I were looking at this objectively, the iPad Pro for me is a great device for a few reasons. So comparing this to my pad of paper, they're about the same thickness. It's a little heavier than my pad of paper, of course, but in this device, I get a full art studio. So there's a big plus. But if you're learning to draw, if you're just getting started, or even if you want to sharpen up your skills, working within constraints is a really good way to get better at drawing. So the constraint being, when I sketch, I choose to use a pen that'll give me a whole line, WHOLE. And the reason for that is there's no takebacks, there's no undo, there's no light till you get it right. You have to really be conscious about what you're doing and then execute that line or circle or whatever the case may be. Or if you do make a mistake, it forces you to work with that mistake. And I feel as though I can't quantitatively or qualitatively assess and give you some research to prove this, but I feel as though when I sketch with a pen, I'm a lot more engaged mentally in my thinking process. Now, the beautiful thing is, if you can master that on a piece of paper, you're going to be so much better at sketching digitally. So that's my first pro versus con, I guess. With paper, it forces you to be more conscious. With digital sketching, it's it's a powerful tool, whether you're using an iPad or you're using a Surface Pro or whatever. Here I'm using the app Procreate. That's what I use most of the time. But it does allow you to undo your mistake, to turn back time, I guess, to a better place when you didn't make that mistake. But building that habit isn't necessarily a good thing. Okay, so the second obvious thing that I think sets these two media apart is with digital sketching. So something like the iPad Pro, it's going to run you, potentially around $1,000, depending on the size of device that you get. And for that $1,000, think of how much you could do with pen and paper with an analog sketch. Now, it may take a lot more time to get to the end result, right? Because in this device, I do have kind of a full featured art studio, you could say. And with that, I'm able to do pretty much whatever I want. I can paint, I can airbrush, I can sketch, I can apply effects, I can use grids and guides and have all these tools, all the tools I would have in a big set of tools that I may spend, maybe half as much on if I were to buy a few markers, pens, and some paper. But if you're a student, don't spend all your money on a tablet right now unless you can't afford it. It's not going to automatically make you that much better at sketching. But it does provide some tools that when you are better at sketching, you're then able to take your work to the next level. There's things like taking this sketch of a car that I just did. I can take my tablet, take a picture of that, and start rendering it. That's really powerful. I don't need a scanner anymore, for example. So the second thing, like I said, is cost. Big, obvious difference. A few dollars to even a few $100s if I buy markers and a few other things versus potentially 1,000 or more. Okay. The other thing with digital sketching versus analog is that the tactile feel of the medium is something that I don't think we've quite replicated yet. Apple's done a good job with their pencil, don't call it a stylus, with their pencil. And if you go to YouTube, my YouTube channel at sketch-a-day.com, you can see a review in which I look at the stylus, the screen, and other aspects of the iPad Pro. But what's kind of missing is when you sketch on paper, you're quite literally creating vibrations. I know it sounds crazy, but with the tooth of the paper and the texture of the tip of a pen, you create this kind of response. There's friction at the beginning of your stroke, through the stroke, and at the end of your stroke that in a very subtle way can affect how you draw. And with digital media, I don't think we've quite gotten there. The pencil for the iPad Pro does have a rubberized tip or some sort of polymer tip, and there's a coating on the glass of the iPad Pro. I've even added a screen protector to my iPad Pro in an effort to create some texture. Okay, so this is just a thin film protector that I put on. But even then, not quite to the point where it feels though, hey, this is starting to feel like paper. And what would be nice is if we could have that. So it may be personal preference, but I do think there's a big difference with paper versus analog as you're sketching. So huge advantage of this. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but look at how thin this is, guys. Very thin, very light, very small. And quite frankly, this is pretty much the only device that I use. It's all but replaced my laptop. A lot of the design work that I do tends to be at the front end of the process. So whether it's brainstorming, ideating for meetings, working with a team, that kind of thing, I can get most of my work done on the iPad Pro. So I do have a Mac Pro for my 3D modeling, and that's more of an occasional activity, but this has really become my design studio, and it's portable, all-day battery life. It's really great. The tricky part with working analog is that it's really hard to create a finessed presentation because of the number of tools that it would require to produce that. Whether it's, hey, I've got to airbrush this because I'm trying to replicate chrome or some very subtle gradient, or my markers might not quite cut it in terms of blending, or whatever the case may be. There are some constraints and some limitations. And even though working with those constraints can produce some really amazing and beautiful results, there's many examples online of beautiful analog sketches that have been created on marker paper with markers, pencils. I mean, you go back to car designers in the 70s, even 80s, 60s, where they were creating large renderings using gouache and pastels and markers. Really amazing, remarkable work, but at the same time, super time consuming, required an exceptional level of skill. With the iPad Pro, it does allow a greater degree of accessibility in terms of creating buy-in with your audience. You don't need that excessive level of skill as you did back in the day. But I do feel as though, even though there are differences with both media, pen and paper versus the iPad Pro, that you can work hand in hand with them. And I'll do a video in the future that shows you some of my favorite tips and tricks to using devices like this. My advice, or opinion rather, extends to the Wacom Cintiq, if you're using that, Cintiq Companion or Cintiq. Also extends to things like the Surface Pro or Lenovo Yoga series. It just depends on your personal preference. I don't think any one is better. Better is completely relative. It just depends on what you want to do and what works for you. And what works for me is using something like this iPad Pro. So again, if you're just starting out, I would highly, highly recommend that you keep it simple. Okay? Pen and paper with markers, because it's going to force you to work within those constraints, and you'll find that as you then remove that constraint and move into the digital medium, that your skills will carry over. The techniques, the thoughtfulness, the execution, the precision will carry over to that digital medium, and you'll find yourself executing at such an exceptional level because you've done the work up front. So do the work up front, sketch analog before you sketch digitally. I know it's not the fastest and most efficient way of producing flashy renderings, but sometimes it's not all about the flashy rendering. Sometimes it's about the quick and dirty sketch, about being fluid in your thinking, and about being able to take a client or person or peer and say, hey, here's an idea that I have, grabbing a piece of paper and a pen and creating a drawing that explains your line of thinking. That's powerful. And being able to do that and not being reliant on the digital medium is super important. Because, again, like I said, I think in my first video, a person who cannot communicate their ideas is on the same plane as one who has no ideas. So be ready, be prepared, sketch analog, and then go digital. Well, thanks. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I know we haven't sketched anything today, but some of these videos rather, are going to be just like that, where I explain conceptually some of my thinking around sketching. I do think we're at an exciting time. I mean, I did not imagine that we would have things like this. I started sketching digitally on those old Intuos tablets that were big and clunky, and now here we are, where I'm able to hold virtually what I would have considered back in the day to be a supercomputer, and it's only a little over a quarter-inch thick, guys. This is amazing. I know we take a lot of things for granted, but this sketching is going to get very exciting, I think, in the next few years. So put in the work. Go analog, then go digital. If you have any thoughts about pros and cons, do leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer your questions or clarify anything in the video. I always like to say I feel like I'm still learning too. So don't be afraid to reach out. Well, thanks for joining us here on Coreskills, and we'll see you next time right here with another video with my thoughts about sketching. And if you do want to find me online, you can always go to Instagram at sketchaday.com or check me out on YouTube at youtube.com/sketchaday.com.